Okay, number 7. I've had lunch, so I'm caught up with the episodes of Jack Ryan, even though Jack Ryan only has 8 episodes altogether so far with their first season. So some things to sum up. Religious alt-right thinking is referred to in the code term Orthodox. So Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, Jewish Orthodox. Orthodox is the alt-right conservative thinking. And that is the abusive thinking that throughout history has been involved in religious wars. And screen's black. Oh, there we go. Okay, night vision. And so when you understand alt-right and the words they use to detract from sounding like abusers and dictators and totalitarianisms and authoritarianisms, it's important to understand that prior to Trump, alt-right groups have not portrayed themselves in negative terminology. Even alt-right doesn't sound bad because there's alt-left. So people get tricked into supporting such tribal positions, not fully realizing the platform of the parties. And so, for example, there's always a token black man behind President Trump at his rallies. He's paid to do that, but I don't think he fully realizes how he's being used by Trump. And women also behind Trump. They too get paid, and female supporters of Trump, I don't think they fully realize what they're getting themselves into by supporting Trump. I mean, the kitty cat tape was the big clue, the big tip-off, but what Trump has done to women in his history and what he really thinks about women should terrify every woman, every man, every human. This isn't intended to be about Trump yet. That's supposed to be the closing part, the threat that we're all in right now. But so that you understand, Mormonism is an orthodoxy. They don't call themselves Orthodox, and there are variations within Mormonism, especially when you leave Utah. Californians were more liberal Mormon, for example. And when they take trips to visit family or conference, they'd experience the Utah Mormons who would treat them poorly. And when they came home from vacation, I would hear it from them about the abuses that they suffered at the hands of Utah Mormons while just visiting. And so, last video was about what my family did to me with the alt-right thinking that they had to justify ripping my children apart from me and punishing me for their crimes against me. That is the alt-right thinking. To take a justification, whether it be from religion or whether it come from government, which I referred to, they call it democracy. Democracy is majority rules. Democracy says nothing about equality, fairness, liberty, freedom, rights. Democracy is about rights for majority, the winning side. It does not talk about rights for the minority, the losers. And so when you hear our government leaders, and even the press, whether on the right or on the left, they both use the term democracy. They both talk about it in terms of our democracy is in jeopardy, both on Trump's side and on the liberal media side. They all talk about our democracy is in jeopardy because both of them have their different views of how democracy is supposed to work for them over the other group. That's why the senators said they won when they agreed to let Kavanaugh be a Supreme Court justice. It's not about a job interview of putting in a man who has a dark past that is not being adequately exposed. It's about tribalism, defending Trump to keep him in power. And that's what Utah government does. They have obtained power over the people, at least in the state of Utah. And the church controls the government, and there's sort of a symbiotic relationship, even though the church is threatening the government leaders to go and side with the church. And so my mom told me, after my kids were ripped from me and taken to another country, that children belong with their mom. That's the alt-right thinking, both for women, because women want children, they want their children with them, but also for men, because men don't care about children. You know, they don't want the bother of raising children. And so they wait until the children are grown up, and hopefully they're who they want them to be in their image. So for Trump, for example, Eric and Tiffany are ignored. But Donald Jr. and especially Ivanka are his prized children. They are his favorites because they are in his image. Whereas Tiffany and Eric are the disappointments. Tiffany because of the mother she had. And so that's the alt-right thinking. They hate the poor, they hate women, they hate anybody who's not white. And they hate people who are opposed to them. So you can be white, like me, but if you oppose them, they come after you. And that's what happened with me. Because when my kids got taken, I was rejected by the police. They did not pursue getting my kids back with me. They let her go. They did not pursue an investigation. And so I was forced to go and live my life without them. But I kept writing my two kids, oldest ones. The youngest one was in the womb. But then I get a letter from my son, and I have it memorized. Dear Dad, I hate you. You don't write me. Their mother was not letting them see my letters to them. So my kids believed all these years that I didn't care about them, that I was the one who left. That's the perception that they have because of what the alt-right thinking who had possession of them taught them. I don't know if my children ever go to my website or ever see any of my... Well, I'm not going to make it through this video. Or if they see any of my videos, or if they've bought any of my books. They need to know I did not abandon them. I never gave up on them. They need to understand that it was an evil enemy, an evil thought process that possessed the minds of those who embraced it, that tore us apart. I had tried to go through the government of Canada, the governor of Utah. I notified Office of Recovery Services when my paycheck got garnished without prior notification, and it was over 50% because of the arrears. I was forced to go back to my parents' place because I didn't want to lose hope in one day getting my kids back. So I subjected myself to my parents' house. Because the other option was to go to the streets and die. See, the alt-right conservative thinking is that I have choices. I can choose to comply or die. That's not a choice. And they don't get it. And they think they trap people into doing their will by giving only two options. And so after the governor's representative sent me a form letter saying that I needed to comply with the nation of Canada and their decision for the divorce. My own country betraying me, not helping me get my kids back. I took the matter to the courts. There's nothing in the Constitution that helps explain the court process that each state has created independent of the Constitution. Like I mentioned, 68% of all arrests never go to trial. And so here I am, causing ruffles with the government because I complained about wanting my kids back. And so I went to the federal government for help. I didn't think the state government was the proper place to sue the state, when all I really wanted was to get my kids back. And I had no idea how to do it, how to petition, because the police refused to do anything, Canada refused to do anything, the governor refused to do anything, Office of Recovery Services refused to do anything. You know, the Office of Recovery Services just said, our hands are tied, we're under orders from the Canadian government. Utah has established law supporting foreign governments' divorces. There's nothing we can do, sorry. You just have to pay the extortion money, the ransom. And I've been paying ransom paycheck after paycheck, and I never got my kids back. I never got to go see them because they're in Canada. Other people whose kids are kidnapped only have to pay a one-time ransom. I had to pay a regular cyclical payments for the ransom, and they call it child support. So finally, in 2006, almost 10 years after the kidnapping, the federal government shut me down, saying that I can no longer sue because my case is not legitimate. So with me silenced by my own government, the Utah Attorney General decided to throw salt on the wound. And he took me to a hearing in 2007. And I told him, as we met in the meeting, he didn't disclose why he, as a prosecutor, and me, as the defendant, are talking outside of the courtroom. But apparently that's the system that Utah has established, to meet beforehand to see if there can be any kind of resolution, which there can't be unless I comply and say, okay, you win. So I don't understand why there's even such a meeting in the first place, if I have to lose in order to resolve the situation. And I told him My kids are kidnapped. I'm trying to get my kids back. And he just brushed it off, didn't want to hear it. He was notified of the kidnapping. I have since learned that when you notify authorities of a kidnapping, they are then responsible for investigating it. So the Office of Recovery Services, the governor of Utah, the Utah Attorney General, they all knew that I had filed a complaint that my kids were kidnapped. The police officers that night when I was kicked to the streets by my parents, they knew about the kidnapping and they did nothing. They are all complicit and are all equally guilty of aiding and abetting. So you can tell I'm a little angry about that. And so Commissioner Bloomquist, whom I knew from the LDS Singles Ward, she sided with the prosecutor, the Utah Attorney General, and he's famous in Utah. He's the one that was later put on trial for corruption charges. And Utah Mormons on the trial said, nope, he's innocent. He's one of us. You know, never mind the fact that the FBI covered it up by not releasing all of the documents. Not to mention the guy that he was in corruption collusion with refused to testify, even after being in contempt of court and thrown in prison for it, or in jail for it. And even the other attorney general that they also pursued legal action against, who got away with his crimes as well with a Mormon jury, because he's Mormon too. One of their own. They protect their own. And that's the problem with juries, because they don't provide justice. They provide bias. And so there have been a lot of innocent people who have been denied justice and who have been punished for doing nothing wrong. And so the Canadian divorce was legitimized at that hearing. Insult to injury. And so, as a writer, I was inspired to do a book about the Constitution, do a commentary of it. And I started writing it and had the first draft finished by the 4th of July, 2008. It was a method of channeling my feelings, I guess. My uncle, my mom's brother, served in Vietnam, and the trauma that he experienced from Vietnam haunted him afterward, and they call it PTSD. But certain triggers set him off, remembering the atrocities that occurred out there. So when he joined the police force, because that's what he was good at, when you have gunfire going off, when you're pursuing a criminal, that triggers memories. And the horror that he experienced caused him to have trouble functioning in his job. And so he had to leave his job, and his wife left him, and he took to art. He did metal carving, sculpting, and many of his works of art involve, you can probably hear the gunfire. I didn't turn it down low enough, but his works of art were representations of the horrors out in Vietnam. But finally, in the 2000s, he moved to Eureka, California, and there was commissioned to do a memorial, veterans memorial for Vietnam. And then he got to be the caretaker to keep the ground updated, maintained, so that he can have a place to live. And so that was my book. And for July, I thought it was appropriate, because what happened on the 4th of July? What do we celebrate each and every single year here in the United States? Independence Day, the Declaration of Independence, the resistance letter to King George, that we refuse to be subjected to his tyranny, and we declare independence, that we will govern ourselves, and that he is no longer welcome. And of course, King George interpreted that as a terrorist threat, and thus the Revolutionary War. And so I didn't do my name for this book. Some of our founding fathers, I believe it was the Federalist Papers, and they signed it Publius or Publicus, the public, the people. And that's how I signed it, a citizen of the United States of America. And it was too expensive to pay for a publisher to see if they'd publish it. They didn't have Amazon back then, or Amazon Publishing at least. I don't think even Amazon. And so on the anniversary of the divorce, which was also her birthday, the ex-wife's birthday, finding out that my kids had been coming down year after year to visit my family and keep me out of it, having been rejected by all branches of government, ignored after I'm trying to redress grievances through the system. I used the book as one last petition for redress of grievances. It is unorthodox, yes, because it's not filling out the government forms for the proper petitioning that's supposed to be done. I was using my First Amendment right for freedom of speech to petition the government for a redress of grievances, using as my justification for the claim of grievance as my rights as inalienably guaranteed. And I printed up as many copies as I had binders, and in the middle of the night, because I didn't want to cause a scene, because I knew that what I was about to do was going to infuriate the government. I knew that they were going to arrest me as the terrorist. I knew that they were going to call me mentally ill, because I'd seen it. The Deseret News covered it over and over again. I knew how Utah was. I knew how I'd been treated. So I knew what was going to happen by giving the government one last petition for a redress of grievances. And I gave one to the Capitol building, because that's where the Utah Attorney General is. I gave one to the Matheson Courthouse, because that's the Utah State Courthouse. I gave one to the federal courthouse. They have a drop box out front, so I put it right there. It was too thick to fit in the slot, so I couldn't get it date stamped. So I just set it on top. The other buildings did not have drop boxes, so I had nowhere else to put it but at the front doors. And that's the trap they set for people. They don't want people redressing grievances, so they don't provide a visible drop box like the federal court did. And so I could only put it at the door. And then I put another one at the Salt Lake Tribune. The doors were locked, so I put it at the door, because the Salt Lake Tribune at that time was not under the control of the LDS Church, as it eventually became to be. The church bought it. So now there is no independent paper here in Utah. They still allowed the woman who continually reports against the church to keep her job, but you can tell how the church treats her. They dismiss her. And in some sense, she's been silenced. She doesn't actively go after the church as much anymore. And you can tell when she interviews the church, her frustration with them, her anger with them, that she wants to say more, but she has to hold her tongue. And then in the other book, I gave to KXRK Studios. It's a radio station that I listen to on a regular basis. It's the Radio from Hell show with Carrie, Bill, and Gina, KXRK, Provo, Ogden, Salt Lake City. I don't know if they're still on the air. I don't even know if there's radio still. But, yeah, I gave one to them. And as a result of doing that, the Deseret News, after my arrest, deleted all my comments in their paper, all the archived comments. So you can't find my comments anymore. You can now find Egyptian origins, unless they find out about this and then delete those too. So, yeah, that shows you how they tried to cover things up and remove me from society. And that's what they plotted against me, because that was the opening. Just like my first wife got her opening when my dad believed that I was violent, so he took her and the kids to my sister's. That was her opening to justify leaving me. The government of Utah got their opening when I gave them the petition for a redress of grievances in a different format than what they required. Just like protesting, it is not a redress of grievances that is accepted by the government. And so when you protest, you get arrested, as we are witnesses in the news with Trump, with Kavanaugh, with the babies in cages. It is a crime to protest in an alt-right government. It is a crime to petition for a redress of grievances in an alt-right government. They have police patrolling our streets who travel by the houses several times during the day. But if you dare to complain, to call on them for help, you are the violator. You are the troublemaker. And you must be punished and silenced and removed from society by being arrested. And so yes, I was arrested 2 weeks later for 3 counts of terroristic threat. So Utah loved the Patriot Act. They loved Bush and his war on terror. And so they adopted a new law of anti-terrorism for the state of Utah. So when I came along, hey, why don't we use it? Let's see how well we can utilize it. Because again, 98% of all accusations do not go to trial. They're the government. They're making the accusation. Because I wanted my constitutional rights. I wanted my kids back. And so they silenced me with the arrest. They removed me from society. They assigned to me a court-appointed attorney, but he had a social worker helper who was a plant in the system to make sure that I never go to trial, because they kept pressuring me. Plead guilty. Go to the mental health court. You'll have a place to live. You'll have money. Just plead guilty, and all your problems will be solved. You won't go to prison. And so I rejected that. And so my court-appointed lawyer's helper, social worker helper, filed a report to the judge that I needed to be evaluated for competency. And all a person has to do on either side, prosecution or defense, is just file a report saying there might be a need to evaluate. And the whole court process stops. And it has to be investigated. And so I no longer got to talk with my attorney. He refused to answer my calls. I was left in the dark. I didn't know what was going on. I had already been tortured through the jail process. I was put in the psychiatric observation area because I corrected the psychiatric employee of the jail when she said that we live in a democracy. And I corrected her and said, we're supposed to be a republic. She didn't like that. And so I was tortured in the psychiatric observation area. And I need to discuss a psychiatric portion of this as well. And I'm going over time here. And so, yeah. We'll continue this on the next one, I guess. But, yeah, I was arrested, charged as a terrorist threat, and then found to be not competent for trial, which is Utah's system to remove opponents out of society and silenced indefinitely in Utah's mental asylum, where I was tortured more. And we'll discuss more of that next time, I guess.